Hello, everyone. Greetings. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you're coming from for us. I'm the Reverend Jill Olds, the director of the Youth Ministry Institute here at Yale Divinity School. The YMI is very pleased to welcome all of you to today's webinar entitled I Hear You, Creating Listening Spaces with Mr. Mark Yaconelli. This is our fourth gathering for this year's lecture series, which we've coined Thriving, Not Surviving, building a toolkit for a flourishing youth ministry in 2021 to 2022. Welcome back to those of you who have joined us before. We see some familiar faces and names. It's great to have you. And a special welcome to all of you who are joining our community for the first time. We are very glad that you found us and that you are with us today. We're excited to be offering opportunities to hear from speakers who have taken what the past year or two has been and have used it to inform and transform their work with young people. Each of our presenters brings a unique perspective and experience, and all of them hold a piece to the puzzle that will help us answer this question. How can my youth ministry not just survive, but actually thrive? This fall, we've heard from speakers talk to us about emotional intelligence, the science of belonging, and the grief work that our youth might need to do in this season of the pandemic. In the new year, we'll be taking a break in January, but we will return in February with a look at children's ministries, and then we'll explore how to engage in anti-racism work with youth later on in the spring. We'll be virtual for February. Our hope is to return to hybrid offerings with an in-person component later in the spring, pending Yale's updated protocols. So please stay tuned as we learn more. Our office has a great staff. I'd like to introduce them to you quickly and thank them for their work. The Yale Youth Ministry Institute falls under the purview of the Center for Continuing Education at YDS. So we have Kelly Morrissey, the managing director of the Center for Continuing Ed, and we're blessed to have Megan Lukens, our communications coordinator. Thank you both for all that you do, and most importantly, for who you are. If you are new to the Yale Youth Ministry Institute, we invite you to peruse our website when you get a free chance. That's yaleyouthministryinstitute.org. We have a whole array of resources on there: curricula for your youth, training modules for your youth leaders, discussion forums, over 1,000 video clips and lectures given by the world's leading youth ministry experts. We have COVID-19 era resources. We have some tips for resilience with youth, resources for anti-racism work, links to other articles and materials. All of our offerings are available for free, and there's a lot on there. So please do check out our website when you get a chance. You can see a link to that in your chat window. We also welcome you to mark your calendars for our upcoming events. Our next offering will be on Wednesday, February 2nd at 12 p.m., at which time we will welcome the Reverend Caroline Ainsworth Hughes. As we all know, a vibrant middle school youth ministry program will filter into a solid high school youth ministry. And in our surveys, many of you asked the obvious question, well, what about the connection between elementary age kids programming and our older youth groups? Reverend Hughes is a local United Church of Christ pastor with several years of experience in working with children's and youth ministries, and she'll specifically explore with us how to faithfully craft a Sunday school or church school program that paves the way for flourishing youth ministry. A link to that registration can be found on our website and in our email newsletter, and will be in our chat window as well. Turning to our session for today, Mark will speak to us, and our session will be interactive. We invite you to remain muted, but we also invite you to ask questions throughout at Mark's directions. We'll also be monitoring the chat window, so if you feel more comfortable to type in a question, please feel free to do that there at any time. And since our session today is about listening and storytelling as a point of personal and professional privilege, I thought I'd introduce our speaker in a slightly different way today than I usually would. So today I start with a snippet of a story. Once upon a time, a young seminarian entered her first semester with more than her fair share of fear and trepidation. She was signed up for a dual degree program combining an MDiv and a Master of Arts in Youth Ministry. But she wasn't really sure youth ministry was her thing anymore, or if it really had been in the first place. She was drawn to the stories of young people, it was true, intrinsically valuing their identity as children of God, but the loud and boisterous fun and game style of youth ministry had never really been attractive to her. As she began her requisite reading for her first youth ministry class, she picked up Contemplative Youth Ministry by one Mark Yaconelli. And she read the assigned chapters, and then she read some more, and a little more. And the daylight receded into darkness as she finished the book, now pink with highlighter marks and with practically every other page dog-eared for future reference. A quieter, thoughtful, spirit-driven approach to youth ministry. It captured her soul yet again for the work, and her youth ministry days lived happily ever after, even taking her to become the director of the Yale Youth Ministry Institute. And so, it is with the greatest pleasure that I introduce you all to Mr. Mark Yaconelli. Mark is an author, a retreat leader, a spiritual director, a story catcher, a husband, and a father. He is the founder and executive director of The Hearth, a nonprofit that utilizes personal storytelling to heal, connect, enrich, and mobilize communities for good. Mark is also a co-founder of the Center for Engaged Compassion, which seeks to cultivate compassion for peace and reconciliation. Interviews and profiles of Mark's work have appeared in numerous outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, BBC Radio, and ABC World News Tonight. He is the author of 5 books, including The Gift of Hard Things and the aforementioned Contemplative Youth Ministry. Mark lives in Oregon with his wife and their 3 children. Mark, welcome. We are so honored to have you here.
Thank you, Jill. It's good to be here with all of you. I want to begin with a quote from one of my favorite theologians, Mike Tyson, who once said, you know, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. And this feels like the quote for these times. Like it's just, we're getting punched in the face one time after another with the pandemic. We had a mass shooting here yesterday in the schools that sort of reverberates among young people. It's sort of the background noise of their life that continues to create this sort of heightened fear and anxiety in this culture. We have all this increased awareness around racial oppression and racial injustice. We have COVID and the pandemic and these different waves, and now possibly another variant moving across the land. And it's so difficult for fragile human beings who want to have a sense of control and predictability. It's just very, very difficult, and we're all sort of disoriented. There's an old thing that used to happen for those of us old folks who remember film cameras, where you wouldn't know what was on the film. You would go and get it developed, and then you would have these double exposures where there would be a picture of someone and they weren't quite here or there. And it sort of feels like we're living in that time where we're not really at home in ourselves or present to ourselves or present to others or to the world. So we're all in this sort of disoriented state, uncertain what's going to happen today. What are we going to hear about today that's going to sort of knock us even more off balance? And so doing ministry, particularly with young people, is difficult. It's difficult to bring them together. It's difficult to address the anxiety, the depression, the loneliness when we have all these protocols we're living with. So I have a lot of compassion for all of you who are out there, who have been given these hearts that want to serve, that want to reveal the way of love to another generation. This sort of compulsion within you to work for low pay and high work hours in order to serve this beautiful dream of God, that we might reconcile with one another, that we might be healers. And of course, all of us here, you know, we're more artists than scientists. Our medium is love, but we're working in this art of ministry. And so what I hope to do today is talk a little bit about our primary practice in the Christian faith, which Christianity is about the practice. And it's always, I'm still practicing it and failing daily, but it's the practice of relationship. And one of the primary skills in relationships is listening. is being present, open, hospitable, curious towards the other. And in this case, curious and open and available to young people. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk a little bit about how we move into that stance of listening in a way that creates deeper connections and hopefully creates a space where transformation can happen, where young people can touch into that image of God within them and that presence of God within the world. But before we do that, what I've recognized in almost any gathering, like the first move, as we're sort of sitting here in that double exposure, sort of blurry-eyed, with all the things that we're all carrying, that this sort of heightened anxiety we've been living in, that the first move, in order to even have this conversation or to talk about listening, is that we have to get grounded ourselves. So I want to begin with this little practice that a friend of mine, Tekka Thompson out of Columbia, Ohio, taught me. So in a minute here, we're going to just get grounded. And the way we're going to do that is, if I can work the interweb correctly, I'm going to share a little song. It's called Faith's Hymn. And I'll play this song. And I'm going to ask everybody, so you're not self-conscious at all, to turn off your cameras. And if you're able to, just in the space that you're in, you know, if you feel comfortable enough, I'm going to play this song. And I want you to just close your eyes and just become aware, with your cameras off right now. Just allow yourself to close your eyes as a way of letting go of this screen, these screens that we face most of our days now times. So I want you to close your eyes and just allow yourself to be present wherever you are. I'm going to play this music, and I want you just to allow yourself to receive God's presence wherever you are as this song is playing. And as a way to sort of encourage and open yourself and relax into God's love, I want to invite you to hum, to just let yourself hum along with this music. And we're just going to do this for a couple of minutes, and then I'll bring us out. Okay, so you're just closing your eyes, becoming aware of God's presence, letting the music sort of wash over you, and then allowing yourself to hum along with it. Then as you're ready, just allowing that gratitude for this day, for this work, for the young people you're called to serve. Just allow that gratitude to move through you. And then as you're ready, gently bring your attention back to this time, this space, this gathering of souls. So I was sitting in the backyard of my friend Eric's house. We were drinking iced tea late in the afternoon, fall, and we were watching our daughters, both of our daughters, about 8 years old at this time. On the other side of this sort of split rail fence is 100 acres of meadow. It's sort of at the bottom of the valley in which I live. And our daughters had snuck under the fence, and they were kind of running around playing in this meadow. And my friend and I are talking, and all of a sudden, my wife peeks her head out of the door of Eric's house and says, "Hey, how are the girls doing?" And Eric and I turned to look in the field. We can't spot them at first. And then sort of both of us at the same time, sort of looking way back in this 100-acre field, we see two horses kind of riding across the grass, and our daughters are each on a horse. Now, Eric doesn't own horses, I don't own horses, and our kids have no horse riding skills. So this sort of simultaneous panic happens to both of us, and we both turn to my wife and say, "They're fine, they're fine." And we wait for my wife to go in, and then we do the sort of middle-aged man scramble. We get under the fence, and we're running as fast as we can across this field to try to figure out what's going on with the daughters that we were supposed to be watching. As we get close, we notice there's a little clump of oak trees. It's kind of shadowed in there, and there's a woman standing in these oak trees, and she's talking to the girls and telling them what to do with the horses. And there's a little trail kind of that somebody had mowed in this meadow, and the horses are following this trail. And so we run sort of out of breath and say, hey, these are our daughters, you know. And she's like, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. These are really safe horses, you know, they're going to be okay. And I'm like, what's going on out here? And this woman says, well, I'm a horse therapist. And I rescue abused horses, and I bring them down to this field to sort of rehabilitate them. And these two are just about done. They're really great with kids. And I said, okay. And I was like, what do you mean a horse therapist? And she said, well, people buy horses, they can't afford to feed them, or they go through hard times, and so they can't get rid of them. And so sometimes they lock them up in dark spaces. And she said, sometimes you'll have a horse, its whole life, it's stuck in a garage or in some dark enclosure. And those horses will be kept there from when they're born and fed sort of like tepid water that's in some metal container, and dry oats, and half starved. And then either we'll be given this horse, or someone will tell us about it. We'll go rescue this horse. And I said, well, what's that like when you get one of these horses? How do you rehabilitate it? And she said, well, the first thing, I got to get it in my trailer, and it cries and screams and resists. It wants to stay in that dark enclosure because that's all it's known. And then I got to bring it down to this field. And she said, it's really interesting. When I get it down to this field, it doesn't recognize the creek back here as water. It doesn't have the same smell, especially if it's had tepid water just sort of in these metal containers. It doesn't recognize grass as food. And so the horse will cry out for food and cry for water. And I'll bring it and sort of drag it down to this creek. And it might even stand in the creek and it won't drink because it doesn't know what this is. And I'll have it in the field and it won't eat because it doesn't know what this is, until eventually it gets so hungry or so thirsty, it'll put its head down in this creek water and it'll drink. And then it'll realize, wow, this is water. And a little bit later, over time, sometimes it takes 2 days, it will reach down and grab some of this grass, and it'll realize this is food. And I said, well, what happens when it gets to that point? And she said, well, that's my favorite part. As soon as it recognized that it's in a field of food, that there's all this flowing water, what the horse will do is run, circles around that field, jumping and kicking, recognizing it's in a world of food and water and it's free. Now, that's our work, right? Is to free the prisoners. And it's difficult because we are also in the prison system. So we're trying to find a way to free young people. And we're in a culture that trains us to no longer hear. We're trained to deafen our ears to the presence of God. We're trained to close and repress the sounds of those crying around us. We're our own compassion squashed. We're trained to not hear the still small voice within us that's longing for us to flourish into who we were created to be. So there's sort of a trained deafness. We're stuck in those dark garages with tepid water, with flavorless food. And this is the world that our young people grow into. They grow into a world that is sort of rampant loneliness, that is filled with anxiety and depression. We all know this. And one of the stances that we're trying to create in young people is this stance of listening, of being present, of of being curious, of pointing our the ears of our hearts in the direction of God. So the first move in this kind of work, as we're talking about how do we cultivate listening, is that we ourselves have to be in a space of receptivity. We have to be in a space where we can hear, where our minds and hearts and inner life isn't filled with noise and images and anxieties, where there's some space in us. There's a little generosity, a little patience, a little kindness. We have to be able to listen in order to help young people learn that stance towards God. And you see this in Jesus, right? So Jesus is regularly taking time, going up to the mountains, going down by the lake, going off alone to be attentive and aware to God, to work that muscle of turning the attention from his own concerns, his own worries, and placing it outward in sort of an open stance to hear and receive what God has given. You know, the first act of love is attention, is giving our attention. And so in listening, the first thing we're doing is we're in a posture of giving our attention, of willingly surrendering our attention to the young people around us. And you can tell, young people can tell when someone is simply asking a question and waiting for you to stop talking so I can then talk to you and tell you the answers, or whether an adult is actually curious. There's a sign a friend of mine says there's two signs that you're centered, or you're in your soul. The first is you're curious. You're genuinely curious about the other person. And the second is you feel a sense of compassion. That there's an empathy, that your own heart is sort of transparent to whatever is going on in the person in front of you, whether it's joy and you're susceptible to feeling that joy and smiling and laughing with them, or it's sorrow and that sorrow sort of penetrates within you. So listening, and I think if you kind of look back over your own faith history, you might notice that the transforming moments occurred because you were in the presence of someone else who wanted to hear your story, who wanted to listen to you, who was trying to position themselves in a way that they could hear the soundings of your soul. This is the space we're in. And the first step to being able to do that is allowing the divine therapist, allowing God's presence, spending time in that generous presence. We're sort of useless if we go from the anxious drivenness of our world to then running into the anxious drivenness of our churches or our ministries. That we have to stop and slow down and allow ourselves to be recalibrated, to allow our compass to be reset towards true north before we can have that patience and kindness within us. So part of the great work of youth ministry is that you have to find a way to move out of the inertia of the culture and find a place to stay still. And one of the ways to do that, and we all know, we should get up in the morning and do prayer. We should spend time in silence. But one of the ways you can do this is every time you're with kids, you do a grounding exercise. So one of the beautiful things about youth ministry is youth ministry exists to get you free as well as the kids. And so the best youth ministers are the ones who recognize that everything they're doing is a response to their own longing for God, their own longing for freedom. So every time I'm with young people, I just did a project in the public schools. So this was not a religious project, but I would start with playing songs like this, or I would start with silence. And guess what? I got a moment to breathe. I got a moment to sit in silence. I got a moment to recall my own hope for God's life in the world. So you could start every meeting with helping everyone in that room just take a little sip of silence, a little curiosity towards what God's doing, a little space in that direction to come home to ourselves. So for 10 years, I worked in a thing called the Youth Ministry and Spirituality Project. We were trying to bring some of these listening skills into churches across the United States, and contemplative youth ministry that Jill mentioned is the result of that work. But we started trying to find ways we could sneak into youth rooms this contemplative stance, this stance of being receptive and open and ears sort of tilted towards God. And there's all kinds of things you can do, right? You can play the song like I just did. You can turn off the lights and light a candle in the middle of the room. This takes care of about 80% of your noise problems. Just a candle in a dark room. You have to figure out who lights the candle, by the way, because that will be the greatest tension among especially middle schoolers. Can I light the candle? No, you light the candle. And then you have to make sure they don't pour the wax on their hands like they really want to do to see what happens. But if you get a candle in a dark room and you get kids in a circle and you say, okay, we're going to close our night, or we're going to open this meeting or this class or whatever. What's some things we can pray for? And maybe it's nobody says anything. It's too awkward. Maybe there's giggling. And you say, well, and then you say something real. Can we pray for something I'm worried about? My uncle is sick and he's in the hospital and I'm worried about him. You say something real. And one day, if you do that week after week after week, some kid is going to say something real. You're going to turn off the light. You're going to light that candle. You're going to have that ritual. And some kid's going to say, my mom's really scared about her mom. My grandmother's in the hospital or something like that. And you'll say, okay, thank you. So other things we can pray for. And the kids will go around. And then before you pray, what I would do is I would wait and allow silence before we would speak our prayers or before I would pray for the group. And each time sort of stretching that silence. And when I've worked with different middle school kids, you can get it to a minute or 2 minutes before you have to speak. And you can feel the kids, all of us sort of waiting in there. And I'm working that muscle of receptivity, of being open, of allowing the descent sort of the spirit in the room. I'm working silence into the room, which is such a rare practice. So we want to be listening for God and take regular moments to do that. And then we want to take moments with kids where we're pointing them Godward. We want them to send them out on walks, little prayer walks. It's like, okay, I want everybody to go outside the church. You have to walk on your own 10 minutes. And I just want you to say this, God, if you exist, I just want to notice you. And then just take a walk, no phones, no music, no nothing. Just take a walk around the church property or around the neighborhood. And they go out and they have this kind of exotic experience of not having any stimulation, of just being in their senses and walking and seeing what they see and hear and feel. And you come back. And some kids say, that was boring, I hated it. Another kid says, it was weird because I saw these two kids playing skateboard and they weren't very good and they thought they were very good, but I'm much better than them. And you have somebody else say, I was kind of looking at these birds. I didn't realize there were so many birds around here. And I was just thinking, like, God's doing a lot more than just being in this church. And conversations will start and you're developing and working that curiosity. My daughter's in high school. She's 18 years old and she's writing all these essays for college applications. And it was really interesting that her essay that she wrote was about these moments. And I had no idea she remembered these. I used to take her up in the mountains above where we live. And we would sit on the edge of this canyon. And I would say, well, let's just sit here. Let's just be quiet and see if we can hear what's going on in the woods. And I would say, now, do you hear God? And we would sit there for, I don't know, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. Just when she was a little girl, we would do this from time to time. And she wrote her essay about this. This is what she still remembers, these little moments that were so rare, where you're sort of sitting at the edge of the world, listening to hear the depth of God's presence. Okay, so we want to work that attentiveness and help young people listen in that direction. And sometimes you create those moments, and there are books and spiritual practices that you can find that have those exercises in them. I wrote a book called Wonder, Fear, and Longing, which is you can get for like $1 in a lot of used bookstores, where I put all the practices that I've used with kids, or Downtime is another book. But the other thing you try to do is you try to catch the young people when they're in an attentive moment. So you take a couple of kids out to lunch, then you get back in the car and your radio's broken and you're driving, and the kids are quiet. And you realize we're in one of those moments, where they're sort of, their hearts are open, they're sort of curious, they're present to themselves, they're not distracted. And you say, hey, let's just try something here. Just look out the window as I'm driving you back to school. Do you notice God anywhere? And just have them look out of the window. Maybe they do it for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but you're developing that muscle of looking out at from the bow of the ship, from their own bodies, looking outward and listening, and developing a curiosity to God's presence in the world. Okay, so we want to listen for God, both within us and both in helping young people do the same. And then you want to help young people create spaces where they can hear themselves, I love this little image, and I'll just read this here. Song of the Spirit. It's in this little book, Healing the Purpose of Your Life. And it's a little image from East Africa. Let me just read this to you. There's a tribe in East Africa in which the birth date of a child is not counted from the day of its physical birth, nor even the day of its conception, as in other village cultures. For this tribe, the birth date comes the first time the child is a thought in its mother's mind. Aware of her intention to conceive a child with a particular father, the mother then goes off to sit alone under a tree. There she sits and listens until she can hear the song of the child that she hopes to conceive. Once she's heard it, she returns to her village and teaches it to the father so that they can sing it together as they make love, inviting the child to join them. After the child is conceived, she sings it to the baby in her womb. Then she teaches it to the old women and midwives of her village, so that throughout the labor and at the miraculous moment of birth itself, the child is greeted with its own song. After the birth, all the villagers learn the song of their new member and sing it to the child when it falls or hurts itself. It's sung in times of triumph or in rituals and initiations. This song becomes a part of the marriage ceremony when the child is grown. And at the end of life, his or her loved ones will gather around the deathbed and sing this song for the last time. So every young person longs to hear the particular melody of their life. But in order for us to hear the unique way we're created, the unique gifts that we have, we need to feel it sung back to us from those around us. And so young people are freed by the love of adults. Jean Vanier, who started the L'Arche community, said that to love someone is to reveal the beauty of that person to themselves. And so every time I'm in the presence of young people, I'm listening, I'm trying to pay attention to the particular struggle that they're engaged in, to their particular gifts, to their particular sorrows. And I'm trying to let those young people know in ways that are appropriate in the times that are right, that I see them, that I hear them. And I mirror back what I see and feel until they can, partly so they can check it with me and say, no, it's not that I'm sad. I'm just really worried. Oh, worried. What are you worried about? Oh, my dad doesn't know what he wants to do with his job. And I'm just worried when I go to college, he's going to get depressed because he loves to hang out with me and whatever it is. I'm learning to mirror back. And so one of the great skills that all youth workers are seeking to develop is the art of asking good questions. I actually used to keep a journal when I would stumble across a question. I thought, this is a question I want to keep. Like, for example, You know how young people are always asked, what are you going to do when you get older? And I remember I was 28 years old and somebody asked me, what kind of person do you want to become? I thought, that is an amazing question. And so I will find questions like that that helps me ask young people, what kind of person do you want to become? Or finding ways to unlock who they are. Now, some of us are not great at that. And there are question cards that I've used in youth groups, that I use when I'm in a car, or if I'm having a meal with kids. I'll throw the cards out and you'll have different questions that will awaken different parts of young people. And then I'm listening, paying attention to what's there. 60% of the interactions that Jesus has in the New Testament, he listens first. And so more importantly than thinking about the words that we want to tell kids or the teachings we want to give or the doctrines we want to teach, is I'm trying to figure out as a youth minister, what are the settings and spaces where these kids start talking? And then what allows me to mirror it back so they can hear the deeper parts of who they are, so they can move down beneath the images and identities that the culture gives them. And I can start to reflect back to them that their unique beauty in the image of God, their belovedness. And I'm so each day I'm trying to be curious when I'm among young people for where that's showing up. And when it's there, I shine a light on it. So my wife worked in a home with abused children. These were children who were removed from their families. Some of these children lived on the streets. So it was a home for boys, and these boys were 7 to about 12 years old. And they were so used to being reflected back to them that they were monsters, that they were unlovable, that in this home they would act out, right? So they would destroy things, they would hurt themselves, they would hurt others. This was how they knew themselves. But my wife said every once in a while, a kid, their deeper self would show up. You know, they'd be sitting around the table and some kid would show up late and say, everybody ate all the macaroni and cheese. And one kid would go, here, you can have some of mine. Or she'd ask somebody, hey, could someone turn off the lights? And instead of somebody tackling someone else, they'd say, sure, I can do it. And they'd go over and turn off the lights. And she said, as soon as I saw this, their sort of deeper self, I would pounce. She said, I would just shine a light. Tom, thank you so much for turning off the light. I really appreciate that. Or David, you know, it's so nice of you to share that macaroni and cheese. You're a generous kid. You're really generous. That's really, I mean, I would have kept it all. And you're trying to listen and hear that deeper self and holding that identity and then reflect it back. So I want to do a little exercise here just to remember and hear that struggle that's going on in the young people around you, and also to practice this kind of listening. So in a minute here, and I think we can do this, Megan, right? I'm hoping we're going to move people into small groups. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So in a minute here, I want to invite you to go into, we're going to put you into small groups, in groups of 4, 3 or 4, 3 or 4, but not 5. And I want you to remember a longing, some longing that you had when you were young. What was a longing, a deep longing that you had when you were young? And then we're in small groups. Each of you will get 3 minutes. 3 minutes. 3 minutes to talk about that longing. And I want the others in the group to just listen. So don't ask questions like, wait a minute, were you 12 or were you 15? I didn't hear that. And don't comment like, that's what I was going to say. Just listen. And when the person's done, just say thank you. Okay. That way there'll be plenty of time for each person to share. Okay. 3 minutes each, a longing you had in adolescence. And you're just going to talk about that. When you're done, everybody's going to say thank you. They're going to unmute themselves and say thank you. And the next person will share until you go all the way around. Okay. So Megan, can we send everybody into groups? Okay, as people are bouncing back in, as they have half a minute here. The first question I want to ask as we reconvene here is, what was it like what to remember and to tell this experience? And I'll just count on, I guess you can put on the little hand raise emoji or unmute yourself, and I'll just trust Megan and Jill to kind of maybe point to who's trying to speak. But what was it like to share, to remember and share that experience?
And folks, as we do this, feel free to unmute yourself and just go ahead. It's tough to catch all the hands with this number of people.
It was terrifying. I don't know these people that I was in the room with, and you asked me to share something that was kind of vulnerable. So I was terrified.
And what did you do?
I went last.
That's good. And did you share something real, or did you stay safe?
I totally shared something real. I'm too old to do fake.
Okay. Others, what was it like?
I agree that it was, and I just said it up front. This is really scary to be, these two faces appeared, and it was a young man and a younger than me woman. And we just took a moment and talked about other things like Legos. And then we dug, I used a timer, and we just did it. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Well, let me just play on that. What was it like to be listened to from the other people in your group?
I was with Dean, and he was a blessing. Just, he was a very good listener and was smiling encouragingly, and we had a very nice visit.
Okay, so it was others. What was it? It was a nice visit. It was nice to be listened to. You had someone who was kind. I think that's
validating.
It was validating. You felt validated.
I was
Others.
going to say it felt refreshing.
Refreshing. So it's actually when someone just gives up their agenda and they're just present for you, you actually get re-energized. You're refreshed. You're renewed, and when you have that kind of real listening. Others, what was it like to be heard?
I was surprised at how easy it was to talk about several very personal things quickly with someone I don't even know.
So something about the space, these people, you were able to talk about something quite personal and quite intimate. So I do all these trainings. I do a lot of work in community storytelling, using story to help communities heal or to build relationships or to mobilize. And it's what I teach in storytelling is the most important thing is the listening. That if I have people really present and listening, they will pull the story out of me. And the same thing happens with young people. If you're available, you have the time, you have the space within you to be present, suddenly they'll be able to reveal things that they didn't know that they were going to talk about. And so both of you become listeners to what's being said, that your ears and your presence can create that safety and that hospitality to whatever they're going through. Anyone else? What'd you notice about the listening?
I noticed like there's something about being anonymous here, right? Like, I don't know anybody here. And it reminded me of this like New York Times thing where they had a scream line for parents to call in and just scream, who during the pandemic, just literally just yell like, ah. And it reminded me of that. Like, I could say whatever I want. Like, I won't see these people again. Like, is this easy to be vulnerable when it's almost anonymous in that way. Because it's kind of embarrassing what I longed for in adolescence.
Yes, there's something about, there's kind of a confessional a little bit here that we could just talk about something real and hope that they don't later search us out on social media and post what we said for all the world to know. Yeah. I noticed a lot of people had, some trepidation and some fear and some sort of anxiety around sharing these longings. And I'm guessing for many of you, you're sharing a longing from 10 years back, 20 years back, 40 years back. So what did you hear? What were the adolescent longings about? What did you notice in those longings?
Longing for meaningful relationship.
Okay, meaningful relationship.
Yeah, connection.
To have some kind of connection, right?
To know that you're enough.
Yeah, so I want to know, am I enough? Am I okay? Am I sort of failing as a human being? Yeah.
Longing
for belonging.
Just to belong to something where I'm included, where I'm accepted, where I can be myself, right? Or someone said longing for affirmation, like, am I okay? Because I'm feeling really sad these days. Is that okay or is that weird? Right? We don't know what's normal yet as we're coming through adolescence. Yeah. Somebody else, sorry.
Yeah, just naming work. A lot of folks are naming good things in the chat. Thank you for that, folks. One person named how interesting it was that a longing that they had at that time in their lives reflects a similar longing they have now. That's an insight they're picking up on.
Yes, right. So we still carry those younger versions of ourselves. And those longings are still present, still driving us. Maybe that's why we're in youth ministry. We're still trying to get those longings met that we had back then. Mm-hmm. So, my guess is if I was to look at if somebody pulled a video and showed me your teenage self in a room or hanging out, it might not look from the outside that you had this really intimate, deep longing for connection or belonging or a sense of self-worth. It might not, I might not see it on the video or see it on the surface. But what I wanted you to hear in this exercise is that the squirrely 12-year-old, the 13-year-old who's always on their phone, the 15-year-old who's just like, I hate all of this, I don't want to be a part of anything, I don't need anything, that these are the longings that still exist beneath the surface. This is the subterranean self that we're sort of tapping into. And so the question, we're adults, we're ministers, we know a little bit about this kind of these soft spaces. But what would you have needed when you were young in order to access that longing? You may have needed a really safe space. You may have needed a lot of time with friends or with the youth group or with the ministers in order to kind of trust them and know that they were safe enough that you could kind of express these things or pursue these longings. You may have been really unable to articulate these longings when you were young, like you could now. But I wanted you to hear that they're there. And what young people are hoping for is that you might help me hear myself, that you might help me hear myself into being, into growth. I'm moving from childhood to adulthood. And to do that, it's all a sort of rite of passage. And I need elders, I need accompaniers, people who can reflect back to me and show me what's okay to embody as an adult. And one of the things that, particularly as I listen to you here, that it's okay to really want to belong. It's okay to long to be worth something. It's okay to long for relationship. It's okay to seek affirmation and validation. And that these longings are often with us our whole lives. And so that even as adults, it's okay to tell teenagers, you know, sometimes you have that sense of community, the kingdom of God shows up, and then sometimes you feel that loneliness again. This is adult life. And they go, really? I mean, you don't get it all solved? No, adult life is sort of the pursuit of these things. And in the Christian faith, we're focused on those longings. We think they matter. We're paying attention to them. Questions are, you know, and I've, you know, this is a 90-minute workshop. I hate these workshops like this. When I used to lead trainings, I used to make them 5 days or 3 days or in a retreat-like setting where we could really practice, move back and forth into these different capacities. But questions about any of these things we practiced. I wanted to give you a little experience of listening to teenagers. And we just did. We listened to our teenage self. And I wanted you to feel the power of listening as well as what it's like to hear yourself. Comments, questions in that?
This is Jennifer. I have a comment about things that I've heard from youth and young people is, you know, even though, you know, in this small bit of time, you know, we did share some deep longings. You had mentioned earlier that it takes time for us to set the spaces that to be real, right? And often we have to show up as real. And I guess I just want to make a comment that that I've heard from young people that they don't have adult leaders for a long enough period of time to set those spaces of generativity and listening. And I guess the question I would have is, I mean, as we are doing our ministry development and talking to our leadership groups about cultivating leaders, is there a recommendation for like a time? We would like to call a youth leader or adults who are committed to 5 years to this. I mean, right. I guess that's my question is what's the minimum amount of time here? Because I'm hearing that in some places we're not hitting it. Like you have adult after adult after adult, you know, and yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, the problem in youth ministry often is that it's like, okay, who's going to handle these kids? Okay, could we scrape together enough money to pay somebody 20 hours to be in charge of their spiritual formation? And then you bring them in and you pay them a part-time salary and everybody kind of goes, awesome, you're in charge of them. And then what do you know, that person burns out or they can't live off 20 hours a week or whatever, and they leave. And so there's this sort of rotating thing. This is a longer conversation, but you're trying to create an ecology of relationships. So as a youth minister, for example, I remember getting a job and it was part-time youth working job. And I said, I will take this job if you will give me 8 adults who will commit to this ministry for 3 years. And when the first day of employment started, I showed up and said, okay, where's the 8 adults? And they said, oh, we haven't got that yet. We thought maybe you could find them. And so I said, okay. And I did not do, I just left the church and said, I'm not doing this job until you have 8 adults. Now that was an aggressive way of doing it. But part of the work of a youth minister is actually to create, to recruit adults and create a community of adults who are willing to pray, to listen, to discern the Spirit of God, and to spend time with the young people. And so that's the number one, well, the number one thing is you spending time listening to God. And number 2 would be having a community. Jesus is not a lone ranger. He doesn't go out on his own. The first thing he does is he gathers a community. And so in these church settings, we need to gather that community, knowing that that community will be in touch with that young person far longer than I will, especially if I'm a transplant to that church or I come from someplace else. I have to find ways to build relationships between the adults and the young people. And there's strategies to do that, and that's a longer conversation. But my dad was a youth ministry writer and a youth ministry teacher and all that stuff. I never was in a youth group. I was in a church, and I dreaded going to church like any kid. I didn't like going, but there was Stu Higgs and 3 or 4 other adults who would genuinely liked me when I was, even when I was unlikable, and would spend time listening to me in that church. And even after my dad hired a youth minister at our church, and that person left, another person left, I was come back in college, I'd come back in young adulthood, and those adults in the church were always steady, present, and curious about me. They liked me, they wanted to hear about my life, they wrote me letters, and those were the relationships that were transformative.
Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, we're just touching on a lot of things, and hopefully there's one thing in this little 90-minute thing that you can take with you. And it might be that you need more time to listen. It might be you need to get together with a couple of parents or a couple of people from the church where you have coffee, you talk about the kids, you listen. Well, what can we really do? What's possible? How do we create spaces where the longings and the deeper self of these young people, that image of God, can be revealed or expanded or known? Maybe the calling is with the kids you have, you need to create little spaces of quiet and listening where they can be religious interpreters, where they can pursue God directly, not just mediated through you. And you can give them tools and skills to pursue that, knowing you're only going to be there a short time. Maybe that's some of the things. The last thing I want to say before we get to the end here is that not only do we want to create spaces where young people are listening for God, where they're finding times to listen to themselves. And I just want to, this one practice I didn't say, I used to always keep journals at the church, cheap little spiral bound journals. And every single gathering, Sunday school, youth group, whatever, I would have a journaling time where kids had to be alone with their own thoughts, writing out. And sometimes you get a kid comes one time, they put their name in the journal, they write one time, you don't see them ever again. I had enough of those that there was always a journal there with a kid's name on it that we kept in a locked cupboard. And then I'd bring them out, hand them out to kids. Okay, so what's one thing you heard for yourself this week? Or what's one thing you're grateful for? Or I'd have a different question for them to hear themselves in that journal. Okay, the last thing is we need to give experiences, and we heard this in the longings, where kids can hear each other in a real way. So in our area, we had terrible wildfires last fall, 3,200 buildings, about 2,800 homes were lost. A school district just north of here in the Phoenix Talent area, almost 40% of kids in the school district there lost their homes. And most of these were low-income families. And so the state and different agencies brought counselors into the school, and they provided money for extra counseling, but there just wasn't enough. And most of these kids were not going to the counseling groups. So they came to my little nonprofit and said, could you use story as a way to help these kids heal? And so we got together a little team of compassionate listeners, we called them. We found people who had skills in listening. We talked about how to listen compassionately. We went into the schools and we created youth story circles. And the story kind of goes at things diagonally, at slant. And we knew if kids could tell stories about their lives, they could begin to access both their gifts as well as some of the struggles they were engaged in. So we did this process with groups of kids. And this was right after kids were first allowed into the school. So we had kids in groups of 5 or 6. They got the masks on, they're 6 feet apart, they're in these small groups. It's very awkward. And eventually we asked them a question about tell us about a moment this last year where you were struggling. Tell us about a moment. We wanted them to tell stories where they're reliving an experience. And we did some safety protocols, only talk about the things you really feel comfortable talking about, things like that. The kids told these stories. And afterwards I said, what was it like to share these stories? And I remember this kid, 6'2", Seattle Seahawks jersey on, rose his hand. It's like, Antonio gets up and he's like, it was joyful. And I was like, why was it joyful? And he's like, because all of us are depressed. And I said, well, why are you joyful that everybody's depressed? He said, because as each person was telling their story, I could hear myself in their story. I knew what they were talking about. And that felt joyful. Many of you said the adolescent longings were for belonging and connection. Remember, when you're young and you're coming into this age of adulthood, you're moving through this passage, you don't know what's normal or not. You don't know that it's normal to be anxious in an anxious time, or to be depressed in a depressing time, or to feel lonely when you're not around people. You don't know that everybody feels that way or that others feel that way. And to get kids to share at a real level, to create settings where they can speak and listen to one another, is incredibly nurturing of the presence of God. It's like 2 or 3 gathered. And so you want to create experiences where kids can talk in real ways with one another. How do you do that? One of the ways you do that is you find ways that kids can speak anonymously. So in these youth story circles, eventually we got to a point where we would gather with the kids and they would just write on a little slip of paper. We'd have a question like, what's your longing today? Or what's something you're really grateful for? Or what's something you're afraid of these days? What do you find yourself thinking about? And they would write one sentence. Then we'd gather the kids in a circle and the adults would read them, and the adults would write them as well. And no names attached. And you would watch these kids go, holy cow, I had no idea that other people are feeling these things or thinking these things. Sometimes they were funny, sometimes they were really poignant, sometimes they were really frightening. Sometimes I remember in one group of middle schoolers, we asked them, like, what's one fear you're carrying these days? And they were all anonymous. We read them, and one kid wrote that I am not lovable. These are a group of 12 and 13-year-olds. I remember reading it out loud. And when you read something real, no matter what you see on the surface, it calls to the deep. It calls to the deep. And when we read these things, you could feel the sounding. And these young people got still and got quiet when they knew that one of their peers had written in a very honest way, I don't feel lovable. I remember this one girl, she has half her head shaved, the other half is dyed these sort of rainbow colors. And she was kind of screwing around the whole time we're there, not really paying attention. And when that was read, she got very focused. And I was getting ready to sort of respond to all the things we'd heard. And she said, Mark, can I say something? And I said, okay. And this young woman, 13 years old, got up and she started to walk around the circle and look in the eyes of each person. And she said, I don't know who wrote that statement, but I want everyone in this room to know that I see you and I love you. And it was just this profound moment of this young person hearing the cry of her peers and then hearing her capacity to respond with love. Where deep spoke to deep, where the cry of the one hurting is heard by the one who offers compassion and love. And part of our work is not only to allow young people to have those spaces where they hear the presence of God and feel the presence of God, and not only to hear their own hearts and longings, but to have places where they can hear what's going on in the peers around them. And so this is the art, is trying to find spaces where reality can break through, where the truth of who we are can show up. This is the art. And it takes a kind of attentiveness and a kind of trusting that God is waiting to show up, a trusting that those young people, their deeper selves is yearning and crying to come to the surface. And despite all the cacophony of what they display or what the culture does to them, I am focused on what's down in the deep. And every once in a while, you'll sense a young person testing the waters. Like, do you really care? Are you really listening? Are you really present? Does this stuff really matter? And I need to be available when I hear that to say, you're talking about you don't want to go to college and you just want to just get out of your house. I hear you're really scared. What's going on there? And I might have to wait 6 months before I can say that because it's a little too intimate. I have to wait till like, after some pizza night and she's helping me clean up. And I just say, you see, I'm kind of scared about the future. Yeah, I'm terrified. I was terrified too. Tell me more about that. And I'm finding ways to bring that depth of humanity up to the surface. Other questions, I'm just sort of offering a meditation here, but questions, comments on what I've said.
We have a bunch in the chat, but want to lift up at least one that says, I love the stories for healing that was just described. I wonder how we attend to the needs of highly anxious teenagers who might feel even more burdened by hearing other people's stories.
So yes, in the work I do, we do a lot of protocols and teaching about, creating safe spaces and how people can be triggered and ways we kind of watch for, especially with young people being re-traumatized or anything like that. And those are really critical and important. And it's giving the kids a lot of space to say, I need to leave this group, or I don't want to share, things like that. And those protocols are really important. At the same time, kids in circles talking, there's a lot of wisdom and strength there. One of the things we did in this school project is we had counselors who came from Spanish-speaking communities. We had counselors from indigenous communities, trained in Western forms of therapy, but also knew practices from their own traditions, just to watch us, because we had a lot of folks, a lot of kids from those communities in these groups. And I remember the two therapists came in and they had been paid to be there for the whole time we were doing this project. And they both kind of turned to us and said, oh, you have kids in circles. If you're in circles, you guys will be okay. And it was just this really interesting kind of awareness that I did notice that when the kids were in circles, yes, there'd be sharing that was heavy, but someone in the group often had a response to it, some other kid that was compassionate or was caring, or if someone offered something that wasn't, the kids would sort of self-correct. And of course, we had adults in those groups to sort of help facilitate that as well. By the way, if you're interested in this stuff, I've sort of, my life has been about taking all the stuff I learned in spirituality and in youth work, and I'm now doing it in public spaces. I'm kind of like taking it out on the street through community storytelling. And I'll just put in the chat if you're interested in any of this work. Sometimes we offer stuff to it's free, or you can come to these public meetings we offer online, but feel free to contact us or to show up at any of those things.
And folks, stay tuned here too. I don't think our connection with Mark is complete in 3 minutes. So stay tuned for things that might come down the pike as well. But Mark, here's another question that came up. Have you ever used art in conjunction with storytelling?
Yes. So particularly with contemplative exercises or silence, I find a lot of kids need to do things with their hands. So I'll have kids, I'll put out paper and crayons and say, okay, we're going to color as prayer. Maybe, and I just want you to say like, okay, God, if you're present, I just want to be with you right now. And maybe you just feel like scribbling purple, or maybe an image comes to you. We're just going to color as if it's a prayer, and then we'll talk about it. Or sometimes I'll give clay and I'll have kids work with the clay and just say, I want you and God to create something right now. Or I want you to show me an image that you think God wants you to see of who you are. And they'll have little handfuls of Play-Doh or clay, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about them. So yeah, art's a great, and it gives something to do with their hands, something physical. It's not so interior, which some kids have a lot of difficulty with.
And one other question in our remaining minutes here. Someone asked, how might we roll out storytelling to a church or to a more spiritually focused community?
Well, I mean, let me, there's about, I teach about 20 different methods for using story in communities. And so the best thing to do is come to one of these trainings. But let me just say this, that every human being, young or old, is hoping for a good question and a listening ear. Every human being wants that. I want to be asked something that will help me remember something that I had left long ago. What was a place that you loved when you were young? You ask me a question like that, and all of a sudden, I'm remembering this lake that I went to with my grandfather. We only went 3 times, and we would fish. And I'm remembering his life. I totally forgot about that. And now, because you're present and listening, and you're allowing me to talk about it, all those feelings and emotions and memories come back up in me, and it's a gift that you've offered me. So in churches, we often feel like we have to be talking, but instead of a sermon, instead of a class, ask good questions that invite people to remember. Don't ask questions about ideas. Ask questions about moments that they've lived, about remembering, recalling experiences, and then create settings where they are forced, sort of like I did in small groups here, to hear one another. No asking questions, no commenting, just be present. Hear those memories, and then help people talk about, what was that like? What did you hear? What did you share? That's what I do in public settings. That's what I do in different parts of communities, whether they've suffered a school shooting or whether it's race relationships. We find ways to talk from the grassroots of who they are, from the ground truth. And what's interesting, if you sat in these groups, you'd say, oh, this is God speaking everywhere. Because God is known in the flesh and blood of our experience. And if you get people to speak from that space, it becomes a holy space.
Holy spaces indeed. Mark, thank you so much for this. And folks, thank you very much for attending. A recording of this session will be coming to you in a link via email in the coming days. And please don't hesitate to be in touch with our office and check out our website for more resources. Thank you so much. And Mark, thank you so much for all that you've given us today.
Thank you. And I just want to say, you're doing more good than you know. Just relax into that. You're doing more good than you know. And so very honored to be among you. Thank you.